Hello everyone, welcome to channel Qtomation. In this program, we are going to see how we can calculate factorial of a number. So what is factorial of a number? How we can find the factorial of a number? So factorial of a whole number is defined as the product of that number with every whole number till 1. For example, if we want to calculate the factorial of 4, then how we can calculate it? So we have to multiply 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, which is equal to 24. So 24 is the factorial of 4. Similarly, if we want to find out the factorial of 5, then again we have to multiply 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So that will give the value as 120, and that is the factorial of 5. We have to remember that factorial of negative number does not exist. So we can find the factorial for only for the numbers, whole numbers which are greater than 0. Factorial of 0 is always 1, and factorial sign is denoted as exclamation mark. For example, 5 factorial is equal to 120. So this is how we can display it, or we can write it. 5 factorial is equal to 120. Now we can see how we can calculate the factorial of the number programmatically. So there are basically two approaches by which we can calculate it. First one I will show you, that is by using looping or iterative statement, that is using range function, and another approach is by using recursive approach or recursive function. So let's go to PyCharm. In our project, I'm going to create new Python file. Let's name that Python file as factorial with iterative approach. I'm just pressing enter, so it will automatically save and create the factorial underscore iterative dot py file, right? So now we know that, for example, if I want to calculate the factorial of 5, so how we can calculate the 5 factorial? That is nothing but 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So product or multiplication of all the numbers including 5 and numbers which are less than 5. For example, if you want to calculate the 5 factorial, then we have to multiply 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So that will give the 120. So 120 is factorial of 5, right? Also, we know that factorial of 0 is 1, and similarly factorial for negative numbers does not exist. So we want to consider that conditions as well. So let's say now I'm going to define one number for which we want to calculate the factorial. So let's say I'm taking the value of num as 5. I will be creating one more variable as factorial, and we will store the value of 1 in that variable. Now let's take the first condition. So we know that if number is less than 0, right? So this is the condition for negative numbers. So we know that for negative numbers factorial does not exist. So I'm just going to simply print this statement, that is factorial for negative numbers does not exist. Now another condition I can put in the elif condition, if num is equal to 0. So what if number is equal to 0? So for that we can simply print factorial of 0 is 1. And for remaining numbers, those are greater than 0, we can simply use following logic. In else condition, I am simply putting the logic for the numbers for which we want to calculate the factorial, and that those numbers are greater than 0. In else condition, I am going to use one range function. So I am going to use for I. So we want to iterate the values, right? So I am going to use for I in range function, and range function will start with 1 here, and I want to iterate, or I want to increment the value until this number. So we have to multiply, right? So if you want to calculate the 5 factorial, we have to multiply 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, right? Similarly, if we want to calculate the factorial for 7, So we want to repeat or we want to iterate, we want to multiply those values. For example, 7 into 6 into 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So for that I am simply using range function. So here I can put value as num plus 1. So reason we are putting num plus 1 here, because if we simply put num, then that will be 5, right? But we know that range function, it will iterate only from 1 to 4 only, right? So it will not go to 5. It will always num minus 1 count, right? So therefore that much count that will iterate, but we want to multiply till 5, right? So we are using num plus 1 here. So this range function will increment the values from 1 to 5 in this case, because value of num plus 1 will be 6 here, correct? So in this condition I am simply putting factorial, and we are going to multiply those values and store that value in factorial variable. So factorial is equal to factorial into I, right? So I will be incremented every time till it reaches to value of num, that is 5, and it will multiply and it will save that value in factorial. So how it will execute? For example, let's say my number is 5, right? So in first iteration I will be 1, right? So I will be 1, and it will store, it will perform this operation. So factorial is factorial into I. So factorial value, initial value is 1, 1 into 1, that will store 1, correct? In the next iteration now I value will be increased. So for example, in the first iteration it will be 1, factorial value will be 1. In the next iteration I will become 2, and this will become 1 into 2, that is 2, right? In the next iteration again I value will be increased to 3. So in this situation factorial will become factorial into I, that is 3 into 2, that would become 6. In the next iteration again it will increase by 1, so that will become 4. So the value of factorial will become factorial, that is 6 into I will become 4, 6 into 4, 24. In the next iteration, the value of I will become 5 again, and factorial is 24. So 24 into 5, it will become 120. And after that the iteration will stop, because it is ended here, right? So up to 5 it will iterate, and after that it will come out of the for loop. So we are simply printing factorial here, right? So print factorial of, I'm using comma, then factorial of num, again comma, in double quotes is, and we will simply print the value of factorial here. So in this situation 120 is stored here, right? So I'm just removing this one. So this is how it will perform. So it will print the value of factorial for this number. So let's execute this program and check out the output. So I'm going to execute this program, right? So if you see here, factorial of 5 is 120, that is 120. So that is how it performs the calculation. Now let's change the value. For example, now let's put number value as 4 and again execute. So 4 factorial will become as 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, that is 24. So that is perfectly fine. Again we want to calculate, let's say 0. If we put num value as 0 and let's execute, so factorial of 0 is always 1. So this is printing the factorial of 0 is 1. Similarly, if you want to see the factorial of 1, let's put num as 1 and execute again the program, and then we can find out that factorial of 1 is also 1. So this is how we can use the programmatic approach or iterative approach for calculating the factorial of number. Now this is the one approach. Now another approach is by using recursive function. So I'm going to create. Okay, so by using recursive function, how we can calculate the factorial of number, that we can see here. So I'm going to create a new Python file, and let's name this file as factorial underscore recursive function. So we are going to use recursive function method to calculate the factorial of a number. So we have created a file, right? So for example, if you want to calculate the 5 factorial, that is nothing but 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, that will give the value of 120. So this is how we calculate the factorial. Now let's say by using recursion or recursive function. So recursion means calling the same function again and again. So I'm going to create one function, name it as factorial, and we are passing the value of that will accept the number for which we want to calculate the factorial. And in this function we will just use condition if the value of num equals to 0 or num equals to 1. In this situation it will return factorial value as 1 because the factorial of 0 or 1 is always 1. And in else condition we can simply put, or we can simply return num, that is number, into, we are again calling factorial function here, num minus 1. So what we are doing it here, right? So I will just explain that. So what will happen, so for example, let's say the value of num, when let's say the value of number is 5, right? So we want to calculate the 5 factorial. So in that situation what will it will do, so it will simply return number. So value of number is initially 5 here, so 5 into, we are again calling the factorial of num minus 1, that is factorial of 4. So again it will call the factorial function. So initially num is 5, so 5 into, it will again call factorial of num minus 1, that is this function will be called again. So here the value of num is 4 now, right? So it will simply return num, right? So it will again multiply it by 4. So in the next iteration it will again call the factorial of num minus 1. So here value of num is 4 now, so 4 minus 1 is 3, right? So again it will call this function with factorial and number value as 3. So it will return the num into factorial of num minus 1 again. So it will be 5 into 4 into 3 till it will iterate. So it will keep iterating or keep returning the value or keep calling the function recursively. So 5 into 4 into 3, and again it will call the same function up to 2, right? So it will eventually calculate the factorial of number, and after that it will simply return the factorial value of that specific number. It will just keep calling that function again and again until it reaches to the 1 value, right? So it will eventually return the value of multiplication of that specific factorial number for which we want to calculate the factorial. Now let's use, let's create a value for which let's pass the value. For example, I'm just assigning the value of num as 5, and let's call, or let's print, let's say factorial of comma num again is, and we have to call the factorial function here which we have created. So I'm just passing the value of num here, right? So it will take the value from here and it will call this function, right? And as I have explained earlier, it will keep calling that function till it reaches to the 1, and eventually it will multiply and it will return the value as 120 in this case. So I will just simply run this file. See, we can see here, right? Factorial of 5 is 120. So this is how we can use recursive function or the recursive approach to calculate the factorial of number. Now let's say I am changing the value. Instead of 5, I am using 4, and let's run the file. It will calculate the factorial of 4 is 24. Similarly, if I give, let's say 7, it will again calculate the value of factorial of 7, that is 5040, right? So this is approach of using recursive function. Also similar way, also by using ternary operator also we can calculate the factorial. So I can simply reduce this line of codes to only one statement. So I'm just commenting currently, so I'm just pressing control and forward slash to comment this line of codes, and now I'm using one statement here. So let's see, so I am just returning 1 if num equals to 0 or num equals to 1, else it will return n, that is num into factorial of num minus 1. So this one line is similar to what we have done here basically. So if we run this file again, I'm just going to run this code one more time, right? So it is again giving factorial of 7 is 5040. Again, let's change the value. I'm just putting value of 3 here. So factorial of 3 is always 3 into 2 into 1, that is factorial of 3 is 6. So this is also one way of calculating the factorial of a number by using recursive approach or recursive function. So thank you for watching this video. In the coming session we will see some more practice program for Python.